Alright, so I've just come out of Mickey 17. I've seen the film now. I was looking forward to it. And I wanted to give my thoughts while they're still fresh. I went in with high expectations. I am a fan of the director and his work with Parasite and Snowpiercer. I was expecting something subversive, inventive, strange. Mickey 17 is quite a strange film, but it isn't subversive. It's in fact pretty on the nose, to the point that I was wondering at the end why it exists at all. It certainly isn't subtle. And the message it's delivering, that we should be kind to other people, that we shouldn't colonize other people's space. You know, these are all such sort of obvious ideas, and they get touted so much in the press that, I mean, film isn't really saying anything new or saying it in a different way. It's just a silly sci-fi caper that doesn't even have a very subversive ending. I mean, it just all ends neatly tied with a ribbon. Now, I need to caveat this review with the admission that I haven't read the book that the film is based on, so what I'm going to say about the story might be the fault of the author who wrote the original book, but then I have to question why this film was made at all, because it doesn't really stack up in the end. There's a good stretch about halfway through the movie that had the makings of a much better story, but the scriptwriters drop that story thread just as it's getting really interesting, and then just sort of plunge headlong into this moralizing tale where they want to ram a message down your throat. It's all about the message, as is so often the case now with Hollywood films. And I'd be okay with that if it was done in a sort of subtle way, but the message here is just so overtly over the top that, I mean, it's just not serious or smart filmmaking. So yeah, my expectations were high. The film starts out with Mickey 17, a clone in a sticky situation on an ice planet away from Earth. And within about 5 minutes, we get a lot of backstory explaining how he's ended up here. And that concerned me right from the off, because anytime a film has to try and explain itself, we wonder whether it's all about the ideas and not so much the story. I don't mind the mechanics of the world being explained, so that there's an internal logic at work. That's fine. But the backstory is quite extensive. But then again, it skips by pretty quickly. It's sort of told in quick, fun brushstrokes, so it's okay. And there's a plausible explanation for why you can't have what's called a multiple. So Mickey 17 isn't allowed to coexist with a clone of himself. In other words, you can't have two Mickeys living side by side. In any event, Mickey's now on this ice planet, and he's working at the behest of a dastardly dictator who's modeled clearly after Trump and a little bit of L. Ron Hubbard, so nothing particularly new there. The dictator is played by Mark Ruffalo, who does this thing with his mouth, which seems to be a obvious affectation of Trump. Not exactly original in this climate, but there you go. I don't care which way you lean or what you think of Trump, but we've seen enough impressions of him online, in the press, on the internet, to know that it's not a particularly original stake with which to skewer him with at this point. And perhaps some more subtlety would have been better. But anyway, Ruffalo does his best to be as obnoxious as possible, and his wife, played by Toni Collette, is equally horrendous. So at least they're both there for the hating. There's also a bizarre moment towards the end of the film, as if it hasn't been clear enough up to this point that Ruffalo is running a sort of quasi-religious sect in the guise of sort of a Scientology. He makes a Freudian slip where he refers to his new sort of civilization as a church before quickly correcting himself. That's just the writer's way of trying to make sure that you've got the message. But this is the sort of script writing that I'm talking about. I mean, these characters are so irredeemably awful. In fact, all the characters in the movie are just ciphers. They're just one-dimensional talking heads, essentially. There's no character development really to any of them. There's no subtlety. There's no realism to any of them. That's not really the point. Again, the point is the message which gets rammed down your throat during the last 45 minutes. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. At the halfway point, actually, Mickey 17 is at its best. Often films struggle from the halfway point, but here, actually, Mickey 17, having explained the backstory, explaining how Mickey has got onto the planet, the internal logic has been explained, and there's some good explanations for that. We now have Mickey waking up in his bed, having survived what people have thought has been a fatal incident out in the field, and he wakes up next to Mickey 18. And they are multiples. Now, this is not allowed in the world, and there's a great explanation for why that is the case. That makes total sense. So essentially, having two of the same person in the same room is cause for them being taken down completely. So Mickey 17, when he dies, is normally just reprinted with his memories intact. But if he's found with 18, they'll be killed completely. And so there are actually real stakes at play now. For the first time in the movie, you actually think, okay, wow, this is big. The other great thing about this development in this story is that 18 is the total opposite of 17. So 17 is constantly apologizing for being around. He's such a sort of shrinking violet that you think, my word, this guy needs to grow a backbone. And then suddenly 18 comes along and he's completely different. He's almost psychopathic. He's confrontational. He takes the bull by the horns and he says the kinds of things that you wish 17 had been saying up until that point. And I can actually hear the audience laughing when 18 came around, because everyone in the audience was thinking the same thing. Thank God he's here. Of course, the one thing they actually never do explain is, and this would actually warrant some backstory, is that how you can print someone with the same memories and the same DNA and the same genetics, and yet they turn out to be totally different people. Now, that actually would have been an interesting subplot to explore, but they do never explain it, and they can't explain it because it doesn't make sense logically. And so they explain it away by saying, well, some of the other Mickeys had different personalities as well. Now, complicating matters is a sort of weird love triangle that develops. Mickey 17 has a girlfriend called Nasha, who goes off with 18, not realizing that it's not 17, if you get my drift. Then another woman who has had her eyes on 17 the entire time finds out about the fact that they are multiples and tries to make a deal where she gets 17 and Nasha can keep 18. Now, I thought that they were going to run with this sort of dynamic, this love dynamic, for a bit longer and explore how Mickey 17 and 18 try and evade capture and evade detection for a little bit longer. But the script isn't interested in that. For some reason, the writers decided that they should get almost immediately found out. And that doesn't make sense, because the film has sort of been building to this dramatic fulcrum in the story. So why would you give that up so quickly? Now everyone knows the secret. There are no stakes anymore, because the cat's out of the bag, the secret's out of the bag. It's like, well, who cares now? And for the sort of final 45-minute stretch, it's again all about the message now. So we have to listen to Mark Ruffalo's endless posturing and Toni Collette egging him on, and it just becomes irredeemably awful. Towards the end of the movie, there's a story involving an alien race who saved Mickey 17 at the beginning of the movie, and who are now dragged into the squalor of this human race that has come to colonize the planet. Again, the message is very on the nose. I don't need to explain it in any detail. It'll be obvious. We even get a dream sequence towards the end, as if the last 45 minutes wasn't enough of a slog, and that's just there to principally inject some sort of tension, because the last act is just completely lacking in any tension. Once 17 and 18 get found out, any and all intrigue from the story and the script just ebbs away. What starts off as a sort of a half-decent concept with a lot of backstory to try and explain it turns into quite an interesting dynamic between these two characters, and then just devolves into posturing, shoving a message down the audience's throat. And the thing is, audiences are smarter than that. They get it. They don't need to be told and battered over the head with it over and over again. So, as I said from the beginning, these characters are ciphers. They're not three-dimensional characters. It's not clever filmmaking. It looks nice. Patterson does a good job playing the two different characters with sort of psychopathic glee on the one hand and social anxiety on the other. But it's all just utter silliness in the end. And, with a better script and more respect for the audience, Mickey 17 could have been like a sort of Truman Show. It could have unfolded more slowly, really played its cards right, and treated the audience with respect. But it seems like Hollywood has completely lost any respect for the kinds of people who pay their hard-earned money to come to the cinema and watch these things. It's all about shoving something down the audience's throat and not letting them work it out for themselves or have conversations about it afterwards, because there's nothing to talk about. The movie's so blatantly on one side over the other, and so clearly anti certain kind of human traits, and so incapable of showing any kind of depth or moral grayness or any sort of intrigue in any of its characters, that it's all just black and white, and it's just the kind of thing that a 5-year-old would get to grips with. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Mickey 17. I'm not going to devote myself to writing a script and laboriously going through it in great detail, because I think it's one of those films that, again, sadly, just feels like an utter letdown. And I really did expect more, but films live and die by the strength of their script and the characterization that's in them, and this is one that really hasn't got the chops